Order. I will call Clive Jones to move the motion, and I will then call the Minister to respond. There will be no opportunity for a member in charge to wind up, as is the convention, for 30-minute debates. Order, order. Clive Jones to move the motion.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move the motion, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Miss Llewellyn-Buck, and to discuss an issue which is very important to me. As a society, we are aware of the cost that cancer has on our lives. It deprives us of a future with our loved ones. It leaves us tormented with constant hospital visits, forces an anxiety upon us of what will happen next, and relentless emotional, physical and mental pain. Pain that does not go away even when the cancer does. I regret, however, that society fails to understand the literal costs of having cancer, not just to us as individuals, but for children, young people and their families. Lest we forget the cruel reality of cancer for young patients, which is often different from that of adults. The cancers that they experience are often faster growing, less common, have unique emotional and mental health impacts, and have significant long-term treatment effects. The support that they require is therefore quite distinct and has specific financial implications that make it especially hard. Yes.
Madam Chair, can I first of all commend the honourable gentleman for all of his efforts in the short term he's been here on cancer issues. He's been very much to the fore. He's been assiduous. He's been really focused upon this, and we thank him for that. In relation to the welfare of children and young people with cancer, does he, or is the honourable gentleman aware that some 71% of families impacted by cancer and cancer for young people are struggling to meet travel costs? That's the case in Northern. I understand that's also the case in the mainland as well. So when it comes to 1 in 10 missing appointments because they haven't got the finance to actually go, and the impact that has on the medical system and the NHS, does he agree with me that now is the time for government to step up and make sure that the finance that is necessary for travelling for cancer with young people with cancer, that is made available?
Yeah, I'd like to thank the honourable member for Strangford for his intervention. He is absolutely right. There are huge costs, especially for children when they have to face cancer, and for the parents of children, because they have to take time off work to be able to look after the children, and there isn't always the necessary support, and I will be mentioning that later in my speech. In fact, now, because research from Young Lives versus Cancer highlights that on average a cancer diagnosis for children and young people delivers £700 of additional costs every month for a patient and their family. These additional costs come alongside household income, often significantly falling, with an average drop of over £6,000 a year. But for at least 1 in 3, this drop is over £10,000 a year. Cancer does not provide people with the decency to consider what happens next, to consider the implications, but instead forces people to start spending more immediately. For example, it adds £250 extra a month on travel to a hospital, £144 extra on food, often due to specialist requirements and extra hygiene caution, £68 extra on energy to ensure that their home is always warm and clean, and clean due to young cancer patients being immunocompromised. These examples and many more, all from day one. I'll happily give way. Thank you.
I thank the honourable member for giving way and bringing this to the House today. Many people will know my own personal story with cancer and that my husband has cancer. And the one thing that we have found on this journey is that the amount of young children who are currently in hospital beds right across Northern Ireland and every other part of the UK, and many of these children, whenever they're undergoing treatment, will become neutropenic. And that means that, as you've just mentioned, the issue of hygiene, cleanliness, food, everything else. There are numerous charities across Northern Ireland, such as Powered by Poppy, inspired by Poppy Ogle, who sadly passed away from cancer. There is Adam's Army, operating close to my constituency in Lagan Valley. These are families that are going out of their way to provide these services because the state will not step up. And that situation cannot continue. Does the honourable member agree with me that cancer is the worst thing that can ever come across the door of your family? And yet, whenever the state don't step in, it makes an awful situation a million times worse.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for Lagan Valley for her intervention, and you are absolutely right. Cancer is the worst thing that can ever cross a family's doorstep, and it affects every family, every person, very differently. Financially, you are absolutely right, which is why we need something called HoC's law, which I'll be talking about later on. And that could give a family £700 every month from diagnosis. At the moment, you've got to wait at least 3 months, and then you've got to fill in the forms, and then you've got to wait another 3 or 4 months. But HoC's law, for not an awful lot of money, could change all of that very, very quickly. But I'll come on to that. So, Mrs. Lovell-Buck, I hope that I have made clear that the costs are quite overwhelming, and yet the existing support from the government is woefully lacking. And I would go as far as to say that it's downright cruel. Disability benefits are vital for children and young people with cancer because of the costs associated with diagnosis. And these come in the form of personal independence payments, disability living allowance, and subsequently carers allowance. And yet, despite these benefits being so crucial and the effects of cancer being so immediate, children and young people face a 3-month qualifying period before they can claim PIP or DLA. I'd just like to repeat that. Children and young people are subject to a 3-month qualifying period, which for most is from the point of diagnosis before they can access support. The very purpose of welfare or social security is to deliver support for the most vulnerable. Young cancer patients go through some of the toughest and unimaginable pain that even I, as a cancer survivor, could not contemplate. They do it with perseverance, with diligence, and somehow they do it with hope. Tragically, some families lose their child to cancer. To be told at the start of this journey through hell that patients and families need to wait 3 months before applying for vitally needed funds is simply inexplainable. The evidence shows the costs are immediate, and yet patients and families are deprived of support that they urgently need from day one. Can the Minister please clarify why they think it is necessary for there to be a 3-month qualifying period? And can they explicitly put it on the record if he thinks this is appropriate in the case of children and young people with cancer? Alternatively, could the Minister please publish the advice from civil servants that are insisting on this 3-month qualifying period? The argument has to be made that the impact of a condition needs to be evidenced for 3 months before DLA or PIP can be provided to avoid benefit fraud. But it is very clearly established that children and young people with cancer will be significantly impacted by their cancer from the start, even before it is diagnosed. Surely having a confirmed medical diagnosis is proof enough. The Minister may claim that someone with cancer might have been impacted by the condition before their diagnosis is given, and therefore their qualifying period will already have begun prior to diagnosis. However, experts make clear that until the diagnosis is given, it is almost impossible for children and young people to know they have a serious condition, which qualifies them for benefits and evidence the impact. The diagnosis is key, and that is simply the reality. Based on the experience of charities I've talked to, children and young people that apply for disability benefits are nearly always successful. Very, very few are rejected at the initial application and subsequently the appeal. I do, however, recognise that this may be concluded as anecdotal, and therefore it would be incredibly helpful if the Minister could confirm that the majority of children and young people with cancer are successful in their applications for PIP and DLA, and that very few, if any, are rejected benefits. If he could provide the precise statistics, then I would be very grateful. Once the 3 months qualifying period has concluded, research also shows that there are significant delays in applications being processed after they are submitted. And this currently sits at up to 20 weeks. The qualifying period and these additional delays are leaving children and young people without benefits or without benefit support for several months. Now for the application processing. The benefits can be backdated, but this is only to the point of application rather than the point of the diagnosis. This therefore leaves people missing out on benefit support for their first 3 months of their illness. Based on data from Young Lives versus Cancer, it concludes that children and young people with cancer and their families would have incurred additional costs of an average of £2,100 before they can even apply for any benefit. Certainly will.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the Honourable Member for allowing me to speak and for securing this important debate. That issue of upfront costs and the costs to some of these children and the families been underpinned by some of the research that the organisations he mentioned has talked about, in the fact that just 12% of families currently say that their costs are covered by the current scheme. And as children's cancers therapy gets more specialised, with often these families being forced to travel further and further, there is a big concern about that, and this is happening in my constituency, where some families are forced to miss appointments or delay the start of the treatment because they can't afford the costs. That is actually costing the NHS a lot of money at the moment for those delayed appointments and those missed appointments. And so, whilst we try and establish new arrangements for travel funding, there are opportunities for savings by stopping these missed appointments that could be put back into the pockets of these young children.
Thank the Honourable Member for Redditch for his intervention, and he's absolutely right. We could save the NHS a lot of money because there will be a lot of appointments that are cancelled because people are getting used to the fact that their child has cancer, that they've got to make alternative arrangements to be able to take them to the hospital where they're going to be treated. And if they were able to get a payment straight away, then that would save the NHS money long term. So the money that it might actually cost to be making these payments could actually be recouped further down the line. So I think you're absolutely right.
Will the honourable member give way?
Yeah, certainly will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and for bringing this debate to us today. He mentions the impacts of investing early, so about people being able to qualify for payments from day one. And I'd also wonder if he agrees with me and a charity set up by one of my constituents in Hazelgrove in Mellor called Teach Cancer a Lesson, about the impact of making sure children's education continues when they've got a cancer diagnosis. So it's Teach Cancer a Lesson, and they're talking about making sure local authorities have a responsibility to review the provision for education for a child on day one, or within 28 days of that cancer diagnosis. Does he agree with me that the same principle applies, that it costs far less in educational terms, in the long term, if that review is done early rather than waiting and the child's education suffering?
Yeah. I thank the honourable member for Hazelgrove for that intervention. She is absolutely right. If a child can have try to have a normal life, which includes still going to school, still seeing their friends, still being educated, then that is going to help them cope with their treatment. It's going to help their family cope with their treatment as well. And it really should be that a school, a local authority, is working very, very hard to make sure that a normal life for that child happens very, very quickly. So I certainly agree with him. Sorry. One family supported by Young Lives versus Cancer only received their first DLA payment in January when their child was diagnosed in July. In another case, a delay of 4 months from the start of the DLA application meant a young cancer patient's mother was left with no financial support because of her statutory sick pay ended before the DLA started. How the government expects people to manage with these extra costs really is beyond me. This is the very worst form of bureaucratic inflexibility, leaving some people to not apply for benefits because they see a system stacked against them, let alone it being a burden to apply during the most disruptive time of their lives. People aren't going to prioritise form filling when they or their child need radiotherapy. The process takes so long that children and young people sometimes have either finished their treatment by the time the benefits are awarded, or most concerningly have passed away before the benefits have been awarded. A child being treated in Leicester sadly died before a DLA decision was made, leaving their family to go through the challenging conversation of wanting the claim form to still be reviewed as the family were owed a back payment. This is unacceptable. The Minister has put forward, in response to a parliamentary question, an argument that those nearing the end of life can apply for special rules. However, this simply doesn't work very well, as situations can change quickly, and some who aren't terminally ill can rapidly deteriorate. Some may still be treated with potentially curative treatment, even if the risk of death is still high, or some may wish not to know their prognosis. The Minister needs to urgently assess the benefits of changing to a medical evidence-based eligibility for these patients instead. There is a precedent that medical evidence is used to expedite access to benefits. The existing special rules process for those with terminal illness definitions don't need to meet the 3-month qualifying period with medical evidence. This principle should be applied to all children and young people with cancer to facilitate immediate access to benefits.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Yes, certainly.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. The Royal Marsden, which is a world-class facility for treating cancer patients, is in my borough of Sutton. And one of the things that really struck me when I went there was how much energy goes into trying to make the whole experience for the family and the child going through cancer as comfortable as possible. So it wasn't just about the clinical treatment that that child received, but it was about having play spaces and comfort areas and doing everything they can to make that really tough experience a manageable one. And so would you agree with me that the state should be seeking to do the same and reduce those bureaucratic hurdles such as the ones that you have described to ensure that that terrible time for a family goes as comfortable as possible?
Yeah, I thank the honourable member for Carshalton and Wallington for that intervention. He is absolutely right. We should be doing everything, especially in the first few weeks, days, months of a diagnosis, to make it as comfortable for a child as possible. As an adult getting cancer, you have a circle of friends around you and you can cope with it. I have no idea what it's like for a child, but I can imagine that it is very, very difficult. But if you've got a play area and you've got things that you are familiar with using, then it must make that experience much easier. Thank you. I'd like to ask the Minister if, as per the principles of the existing special rules process, whether he will consider using medical diagnosis to allow children and young people with cancer to apply for benefits as soon as their diagnosis is confirmed. Does the Minister also recognise that the special rules process in its current form is flawed? One young person treated in London was only awarded a DLA a few weeks before they sadly died, despite using the special rules process, which should have expedited their benefits. The stress placed onto their family was significant. Mrs. Lewell-Buck, I specifically would like to pay tribute to the campaign of Kerry and Francis Malai-Davis to establish HoC's law in the name of their 6-year-old son, who tragically died from a rare form of cancer. Their story is heartbreaking, but unfortunately a common reality of parents being forced into darkness. At one of the lowest moments in their life, with the government looking away from them, support is a struggle to access rather than a guarantee. I personally endorse the objectives of HoC's law for financial aid to be granted to the parents of chronically sick children from day one, and for the removal of the 3-month qualifying period, as also called for by Young Lives versus Cancer. Their research is exactly right. For a very, very small cost, the government would be able to transform the lives of thousands by delivering parents a limited time, non-means tested benefit to cope with their lives completely changing. I met with Kerry on Monday to discuss their campaign and attended the HoC's Law event earlier today on the Terrace Pavilion. Hearing directly from their lived experience and from the experts at this event just reinforces why we urgently need some change. Does the Minister support Kerry and Francis's campaign for HoC's Law? And if not, can he explain why not? PIP and DLA are not the only benefits left severely delayed by a system that doesn't work. Carers can only apply for carers allowance and other associated carer support once PIP and DLA have been approved by the young cancer patient that they're caring for. This means that carers may be caring for many months before they can apply for carers benefits and get what they are entitled to. I could continue. There exists a loophole in the universal credit whereby young people who are at university when they are diagnosed with cancer, who then defer their course with the aim of restarting it when they finish treatment, are not entitled to student finance because they aren't actively attending university. They also, however, are not entitled to universal credit because they're still classed as in education. Students shouldn't be forced to totally drop out and start university from the beginning, because for the sake of stating the obvious, a cancer diagnosis is not their fault, and forcing them to disrupt their lives even further is completely pointless. Will the Minister look at the broader welfare support system in relation to children and young people with cancer, in cooperation with expert charities, to ensure that other loopholes are closed and to ensure that the full package of support meets their needs? There are too many points to raise in just one debate, but I would like to conclude on a slightly more optimistic note. Following confirmation from the Department of Health and Social Care that Children and Young People's Cancer Task Force will be launched this year, and that it will seek to identify ways to improve the experience and outcomes for children and young people with cancer. While I wait to see the specifics of the relaunch of the task force, the principles are of good intention. I know that the Honourable Member for Gosport has been an incredible champion for this project. Will the Minister work with the Department of Health and Social Care to ensure that the Children and Young People Cancer Task Force looks at psychosocial support, something I couldn't address in my speech, along with welfare, and make representations to the Health Minister to ensure that this new body links appropriately with a long-term cancer strategy for England? Thank you.
The question is that this House has considered the matter of welfare for children and young people with cancer. I now call the Minister, Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Mr Lewell. But like everyone else, I'm delighted to find you in the chair this afternoon, and I want to welcome very much the debate, the speech the Honourable Member has had, the consistent attention he's paid to this particular issue since he was elected last year, and I welcome what all the others who've spoken in this debate have said as well. There are a lot I would have liked to have said in response. Unfortunately, I've only got, I think, 5 or 4 minutes now in which to say it, so I'm going to have to cut my remarks rather short. So some of my responses I might need to write to the Honourable Gentleman about rather than being able to put them on the record now. But I'm glad he's drawn attention to the fact that within our 10-year plan for the NHS, within which the Secretary of State has made clear he wants there to be a separate cancer plan, he is reinstating the task force that the Honourable Gentleman has just referred to. And that, I think, is going to be a very helpful, the Children and Young People's Cancer Task Force, to focus on identifying ways to improve outcomes for this particular group of patients. But the debate has focused really on the contribution of the social security system in supporting families of children and young people with cancer, through disability living allowance for children aged under 16, for personal independence payment for those who are 16 and above. And those benefits are available if a child or young person's condition or illness is long-term and gives rise to care, daily living or mobility needs. And the benefits contribute to the extra costs arising as a result of a disability or health condition. I'm not going to claim that the support meets all the costs. That would be incorrect. But they're a contribution. That's the intention of them. And the assessment for those benefits is based on the needs of the individual rather than on the condition. And certainly many with cancer are eligible. And the highest level of benefits can mean an extra £9,500 a year tax-free, so the order of magnitude that the Honourable Gentleman refers to. The benefit is usually paid to the parent of the child and so can help with overall family finances as they see fit. And we're currently supporting about 3,000 children under 16, 2,000 young people 16 to 24 with cancer, with an average award of around £155 per week. I will give way to him. I will say to him that I'm not going to have very much.
I do apologise that I've only left you with a few minutes, and I've no idea what you're going to say, but I would really like you to make some comment about Hughes Law, whether you support it or whether you do not support it, because that would make a huge difference to every single family.
Yes, I'm not able to announce this afternoon a big change along the lines that he has suggested, but I do want to comment, or I would have done if I'd had a little bit longer, on the point about the qualifying period. I've met the campaigners with their MP, my honourable friend, the member for North East Hertfordshire, and they make a compelling case and a very vivid case about their own experience and the financial and other emotional difficulties that they suffered as a result. But the qualifying period is there to distinguish between a short-term condition and a long-term condition. It's not about fraud, as he suggested might be the case. It is to make that distinction. And it's quite an important part of the eligibility process for benefits. And I'm not able to announce a big change in that. Of course, you know, we will keep these things under review. We are certainly, I've met the campaigners. We'll certainly listen to representations that come forward.
Order. Give a few moments just for people to swap over. Yeah.